Welcome back. As COVID-19 continues to impact our everyday lives, the instinct of any parent out there is to protect their kids. But as there are more and more unknowns, it's difficult to know how to navigate these conversations. So, here to help us out with that is youth and family therapist Tania DaSilva. So nice to have you with us, Tania.
Thanks for having me.
So, Tania, I understand that you've been discussing the pandemic with a lot of your patients over the last few weeks, and I'm curious to know, how are children currently interpreting this pandemic?
What I've noticed is parents initially were a lot more nervous. For kids, they were still kind of coming down from March break and this extended March break. Now we're starting to notice it's definitely settling in. So it's changing depending on the age. Our younger kids, that like 4 to 7 range, they're more so noticing I'm missing birthdays, I'm missing gymnastics. Our 7 to 11, they're really bored. They're asking about, are we ever going to go back? Is school ever going to resume? Are we ever going to see grandparents? And I find that 11 and up, they're understanding what's happening a lot clearer. So they have more of those concerns around, financial issues. My parents are laid off. Are my grandparents going to get sick? Am I going to get it? So it definitely changes depending on the age.
And you make some really good points there, Tania, because kids take a lot of their cues from their parents, and some parents are anxious right now. So tell us about broaching that conversation. How do we open up the conversation about COVID?
So, and you're totally right there. I find us as adults, we know what's going on, right? So the financial stress, the unknown about our jobs, about the economy. So they are feeding off of that. And I've had kids be like, my mom's really nervous lately, or my parents are arguing more. So the way that we've breached it with them is we like to follow their lead. So I ask them, I'm like, what have you heard about it? What do you have questions about? I want to understand what's actually going on in their mind before I start filling it with other things. So sometimes as parents and even as adults, we mention something that they haven't even thought of yet. And I've noticed that in sessions where kids are like, I didn't think about my grandparents passing away until mom and dad said it. So when you're having the conversation, taking their lead, asking what they've heard, what they know, not interjecting with any worries or concerns that we might have. But I also take a different approach where I like to give them a little bit more information as to what it is. So I typically, the way I start with it is I'm like, it's a new virus. It's something we don't know a lot about, which is why, we're staying home so that we can learn more about it. I connect it back to the health system as well, where I'm like, we don't want to overwork our doctors or nurses with everyone being sick at the same time. And a big question that kids have is where it came from or how it started. So I avoid where it came from, because I think that can just breach a lot of discrimination that we don't need. So the way that I start it is I'm like, we all love to travel. And this started in one part of the world, and it jumped on a plane with all the rest of us. And now, it's spread. And I feel like that gets some like a deeper level of an understanding as to why planes have been, grounded, why their vacations got cut short. But it doesn't really add into any discrimination, because that's been a big topic that's come up in our sessions as well.
What do you think is the most important message that adults need to be communicating to their kids right now?
I think the basics. So we keep connecting it back to just general hygiene. We've been doing it a lot, even with with pepper or with glitter, because it's something that they can actually see. And we've been connecting it to, this is a virus. So if we touch something, it stays. So general hygiene, washing your hands, sneezing into, your elbow. So that stuff really helps. But a big thing too is for kids, they're starting to worry about how long is this going to go on? So we're always connecting back to this is our new reality, but what can we do within this new reality? So you missed your friends. All right, we're going to set up Zoom calls. You missed school. Well, we're eventually going to get back to school. So you want to help them connect to the fact that it's not forever. It's a temporary thing. And this is what is in our control and what we can do in the moment. I find that really helps as well.
Is there any particular language, though, that we should be totally avoiding?
Yes. So problem-focused language is a big one. And for us as adults, it was a problem, right? If you're getting laid off, if you work for yourself, your kids are now at school, like their school is within the home. So there's been a lot of things that can be labeled as problems. So something that we have been talking about is avoiding that problem-focused language and moving it over to solution-focused language. So yes, now school, I'm your teacher, we're doing homeschooling. That could be seen as a problem, but instead, how can we work together? What's the solution? What schedule can we come up with? What area in the house can we use so that we're all sharing space? Another thing is overly emotional language. So again, when our stress is rising, they pick up on it. So noticing, what are you saying in front of them? What are they listening to? And is it emotionally driven? So that's kind of the language that we've been going in between, is focusing on, is it overly emotional? Is it problem focused? And how can we move it into more secure language and more of a solution focused approach?
Well, as you mentioned, we know kids are feeling, a certain amount of anxiety, but adults are too. And I'm just curious, should we be sharing that and talking about that and relating that, or should we be hiding our anxious feelings from our kids?
So you definitely don't want to hide it. So an activity that we've actually been doing is we've been creating a worry period for families. So as adults, we have questions too. Every day it's changing. The news is different. So I think it's so good to be honest about that, where it's like, you know what, we're worried too. We have questions too. This is new. So we're all figuring it out. Let's have a worry period where I'll tell you about, maybe some of my worries. You'll tell me about some of yours. And then we actually use that space to validate emotions and to show them that there is a space for emotions, because you don't want to shut it down. And a really good thing that I find that's come out of this is sometimes I'll ask questions where it's like, you know what, we don't know either, but we are worried about it. We're thinking about it anyway, and it helps validate that. And then together you can go on credible sources and sites and look for those answers together.
A lot of people right now worried about finances, Tania. So should parents actually be transparent with their kids about that? A lot of people out of work right now are worried about losing their jobs.
That's definitely been a big topic for us, where parents have actually had separate sessions with us to talk about how to approach this. So I think it needs to be age appropriate. And a tip that we always use is, if you can explain something to a child in one sentence and they'll get it, then it's age appropriate. If we have to keep going back and re-editing or re-explaining, then it's not age appropriate. So that's one tip. Another thing is looking at it, is this a child's problem or an adult problem? Our mortgage deferrals, things like that. It's not a child's problem. They don't need to know about it. But obviously there's been a lot of changes and cuts to how we're spending money in the household. So it's a great opportunity to have a lesson on financial literacy, to explain, why we save or why we're cutting back, and to have your kids involved in a way that makes sense. One thing that's actually come up a lot is some kids are starting to blame themselves, where they're like, oh, maybe I shouldn't have signed up for hockey or gymnastics or karate or whatever it is. And we like having that conversation where it's like, no one knew this was happening. It's not your fault. We've actually started talking about credits as well, because some of them are like, oh, my parents have lost that money. And we're like, no, it's just, being deferred, where you can use it when things settle down. So it really depends on the family dynamic, but definitely having a conversation about finances is a great financial literacy learning opportunity.
We know that for a lot of adults, the consumption of news is very much anxiety inducing. So should we be limiting the amount of news that we have on in the household, or even that our kids have access to?
Absolutely. I find, even for me, I've kind of limited my news intake, because if it's on constantly all day, every day, it is causing us to feel more anxious. So that is a conversation we've been having. So for parents, we've been telling them, definitely limit how much it's on and how much you're exposing your kids to. We've been encouraging times throughout the day where when the premier is talking, maybe that's when we want to sit down and watch it and get the information for ourselves. But definitely as adults, not watching it all day, every day either. For children, we want to also understand that the language that's being used in the news isn't always child friendly. So what we've been doing with our clients is I'm like, you know what, you're not going to be exposed to the news, because they're not speaking to you, they're speaking to adults. But mom and dad are going to take that news and they're going to kind of work through it and explain it to you and share it with you in an age appropriate way. And that's worked really well, where we've actually coupled it with that worry period, where it's like, these are the updates in the world. Do you have any questions about these new updates? So that definitely helps. I find with kids that are exposed to social media, that's a whole other dynamic, where checking in with them on what are you seeing online, going into fact checking it, going to credible sources, even doing a social audit. So I do this a lot with my preteens, where I'm like, well, what are you looking on online and how is it making you feel? So if it's making you feel anxious, maybe we should mute that account for a little bit, or spend less time on Instagram or Twitter or whatever it is that they're starting to feel anxious while they're on.
Tania, thank you so much for this. We're going to have a rundown of all of your tips on our website. We're back right after this.